Hello, how's everybody doing tonight? Yeah, great to see everybody in person, great to see everybody online. I'm Mark Etkind, I'm the CEO of the Computer History Museum. One of our goals at the museum is to have legends and leaders on this stage talking about the most important topics in computing. And that's what we're doing tonight. We have three leaders who are leading in the future of chip design for artificial intelligence. You could say we're in a Cambrian explosion of chip design right now. We're going to hear from the leaders of that revolution tonight. I want to thank our sponsors. It's Mark and Mary Stevens. They are sponsoring these great discussions, not just tonight, but they sponsored a whole series of discussions, and really thankful for them for their leadership. We want every one of you to be part of the conversation. So you're going to see a QR code on here. If everybody holds up their camera, if you get that QR code, you'll be able to respond to polls. You'll be able to ask questions as well. So please grab that now. And then lastly, I want to introduce the leader of tonight's event, Dave Patterson. Dave is the Pardee Professor of Computer Science Emeritus at University of California, Berkeley. He's also a Google Distinguished Engineer. You probably know Dave as the leader of the RISC project. We know Dave here at the museum as a huge friend of the museum. He has been a fellow, which is our most distinguished honor, and he has shared his collection with us. And so we have some original pieces that are important for our collection to help educate the next generation. And most importantly, he has been a friend to our curators, and he has been advising us on our collection and our storytelling, and he's a frequent guest on our stage. So please welcome Dave Patterson.
Thank you. Hi, thanks everybody for showing up. I get to introduce two of my friends. Bill, Norm, and I have known each other since the 1980s when I was an assistant professor at UC Berkeley. And Bill was a grad student, a PhD student at Caltech, and Norm at Stanford University. Bill Dally has been building network-connected computers ever since Caltech. After graduation, he joined MIT, where he built a couple of more network supercomputers, or network computers. After about a decade, he came back to Stanford University, where he eventually became chair of the computer science department at Stanford. In about a decade later, in 2009, he became the chief scientist at Nvidia. That was 16 years ago. He still holds that position, but now he is also a senior vice president. I was trying to figure out how to figure out of all of his contributions what's to pick. So right thing to do is ask AI, right? So the AI chatbot, according to the AI chatbots, his most significant contributions are a few, but it's wormhole routing and the related flow control techniques. And it's a practical, low latency switching method for chip and system level networks. And he's also wrote a book with his friend Brian Tolles, Principles and Practices for Interconnection Networks. This is kind of the Bible of networking, which systemized topology, routing, and flow control design. And it shaped both academic research and industrial research for decades. Also at Stanford, his Imagine and Merrimack projects kind of made a very strong case for stream processing, which was an important conceptual precursor to a GPU, modern GPU computing. Norm, when he was a graduate student at Stanford, worked on the MIPS project, which is a pioneering RISC architecture. After graduation, he joined Digital Equipment's Western Research Labs, where he stayed for about a decade, and then he went to HP Labs after that. In 2013, his friend from WRL, Jeff Dean, approached him to try and go to Google to build hardware for this new deep learning, machine learning ideas. Norm was very skeptical given all the hype about AI in the past, but Jeff kind of convinced him to come because he said, this deep learning, it works on everything we try. So he joined in 2013. He is now both a fellow and a vice president at Google. I asked AI about Norm's contributions, and they mentioned the TPUs, for his work at Google, and then his work on memory hierarchy design at DEC and HP, particularly victim caches and prefetch buffers. As I prepared this, Norm and Bill have these incredible impact and highly parallel lives. So by 10 features, they have similar careers. So the first is they got their bachelor's, master's, and PhDs at 3 different institutions. I was just a stay-at-home, stayed at the same one. Secondly, they both got graduate degrees from Stanford, a master's for Bill and a PhD for Norm. Both of them were supervised by John Hennessy, who I think is here tonight. Both are vice presidents at their respective companies. Both are fellows of ACM. Both are fellows of IEEE. Both are fellows of the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences. Both were elected to the National Academy of Engineering, a very prestigious honor. Both won the IEEE Seymour Cray Computer Science and Engineering Award, and both won the ACM IEEE Eckert Mauchly Award, which is the highest award in computer architecture. So they have very busy lives, but they took some time out to be with us. So I'd like to, let's welcome them with a round of applause for their contributions and for being here. Great.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah. So for about 30 or 40 minutes, I'll do the questions, but after that, we'll open up to audience questions. So the title is Silicon Gold Rush, which suggests a period of intense innovation, investment, and competition. From your perspectives at Nvidia and Google, what defines this gold rush era for AI hardware, and what makes it fundamentally different from previous eras of computer architecture development? And start with Bill.
Yeah, so I think there are 3 characteristics that really define this one and make it very different from some in the past. And it's really intense economic demand. AI is working on everything they apply it to, like Jeff Dean said. And as a result, the demand for more tokens, more flops, more AI is insatiable. At the same time, the application is rapidly evolving but relatively simple compared to the big supercomputing applications we had with millions of lines of code. A transformer is a relatively simple thing, and so it's easy to look at what you have to build to make that go fast. And also, people are willing to evolve very quickly. There are no dusty decks. If you want to look at contrast, in the early 90s, there was sort of a computer architecture gold rush around supercomputing. It turns out there was no intense economic demand. It was fueled by the DARPA Strategic Computing Program. They gave a bunch of funding money, made people think that there was a big downstream market, which there wasn't. Lots of people founded companies, which most wound up going bust, things like thinking machines and the like. The applications then were dusty decks with thousands of lines of, in some cases, close to 1 million lines of code. And you could accelerate what appeared to be the important kernel, but Amdahl's law would come up and bite you because there was the other 99% of the code that wasn't accelerated. And so the ease of actually getting things accelerated with a simple application that you can accelerate a few primitives and get really good results, real economic demand, I think make this one stick. This is not one of these, like the list machine frenzy of the 80s or the supercomputing frenzy of the 90s. This is a real value delivering event.
So actual market demand for computers, Norm, what's your take?
Yeah, I'm kind of a fan of keeping attention of what's happening in the global economy, and the amount of money that's being invested is just incredible. So, for a while, New York had a leaky tunnel that was 100 years old going to New Jersey, and they were $1 billion short. And then, Google has announced they're going to have $105 billion worth of CapEx next year. And other companies are investing similar amounts. So it's, there's going to be winners and losers, and everyone wants to race as fast as possible.
Yeah, well, you guys were making an analogy to the actual gold rush. So who are the prospectors and who are the sellers of the pickaxes here?
Well, the prospectors are the people who are finding verticals, right? And if you find the right vertical to apply AI to, I think you can strike it rich, just like the prospectors did. Nvidia and companies like Google that make the infrastructure, we're Leland Stanford, right? We're selling the picks and shovels to the prospectors, and whether they strike it rich or not, we're going to make money.
Well, we're still both paying the memory companies a lot of money.
Point taken.
Yeah. Well, I think it was Micron made as much money in the last quarter as they had made in the 19 years previously.
It's interesting seeing their revenue go up while the number of parts sold stays level.
Exactly, yeah. The margins through the roof, yeah.
So an unnamed colleague of mine has accused training accelerators of convergent evolution. So that's a biological jargon for independent evolution of similar features and species of different lineages. So his claim that you guys have a convergent design is a max reticle compute die with a large systolic matrix unit you pack as many HBMs that fit around the outside and the perimeter, and then you use the fastest SerDes you can to do a custom link. I expect you don't agree with that, and so why is he wrong, and that GPUs and TPUs have divergent approaches, and is there anything you like about the other guy's design? Norm first.
I'll start. One has to remember about the Cambrian explosion. There was also the implosion that happened afterwards. So there were all these weird and wonderful creatures, that look like giant pill bugs, but with like weird appendages sticking out. And they didn't survive the extinction event. And so I think the same thing is true. There's been many startups with many different ideas, but I think the reason why Nvidia and Google have both been successful is that a bunch of these other ideas weren't as capable, and so, they may go extinct.
So that's why it converged. You both had good taste in what you chose to.
Yes.
But, I don't know that we've even converged.
Okay.
I think TPUs and GPUs look very different. I guess
Okay, great.
At a 20,000-foot view, yes, the application drives certain requirements, right? You have gems, you're going to need some matrix multiply units. You have softmax and norms, you're going to need some vector units and things that can do transcendental functions. You need a certain amount of memory capacity, and a certain amount of memory bandwidth, you need a certain amount of communication bandwidth. But there's a lot of nuance, right? That's what the application demands. Everything is going to have that, even though weird bug-like creatures are going to go extinct. But there's a lot of nuances in how they're combined. For many years, Nvidia, I think, kind of led the way with improved numerics. We published a paper at MLSys a few years ago and talking about vector scaling, and out of that came NVFP4, and then a few years later, all the MXFP formats kind of followed suit. And that's an important nuance. It can give you a 2x advantage over somebody who was doing just FP8 before to get the same level of accuracy. Similarly with sparsity, Song Han and I wrote a paper in 2015 in NeurIPS about, most neural networks are naturally very sparse, and then we put hardware support for sparsity starting in our Ampere generation. And that's something you don't find in every one of these bug-like creatures. There's a lot of nuance down the way. Now, I think Google has a big advantage in designing their TPUs, that up until recently, they had one customer, Google, and so they could decide exactly what they wanted to do and do it. And Nvidia is fortunate that we have a 68% share of both the inference and training market, but what comes with that is we have lots of customers, and we have to keep them all happy, which means they come and ask for feature requests, and if you're a big enough customer, you have to at least kind of entertain it a little bit and make it seem like you.
So you have to do a lot of travel and talk to them.
and you have to put things into your hardware to make all these different people happy, and I think that drives certain things in the machine that. If we could just build exactly what we wanted just for ourselves and not have to listen to customers, we might do better. So I'm a little bit envious of the TPU's ability to do that.
So you admire their small customer base.
Yeah. I do think that one thing that they have is they have a pretty neat interconnection network with the training TPUs. The 3D torus. I built a lot of supercomputers, both at MIT and with Cray in the 90s with 3D torus networks. And so I'm very fond of that. And I can see the hand of the co-author of my book, Brian Tolles, work in that network.
And we studied that book very carefully. So.
In terms of the Cambrian explosion, though, I liked your analogy there. There was a similar Cambrian explosion with graphics chips. I don't remember when exactly that was, the sort of late 90s, early 2000s. There were no fewer than 100 graphics chip startups in Silicon Valley. And after whatever the weeding out of the not fit, the survival of the fittest, there were two remaining. It was Nvidia and ATI, which wound up getting acquired by AMD. Right. And I think something very similar is the likely outcome of the current explosion.
Okay, Norm, he likes the, and I agree, I think the optical interconnect, the Google, of course, I'm biased because I get a paycheck from Google, but I think the optical interconnect is a very cool feature. What about the Nvidia architectures you find attractive? or the customer base, or whatever.
I think Bill said it well in that, there are certain operations that we both have to support, matrix multiply, vector operations. One of the things that was different about TPUs is, our first one was a PCI card, and just did inference, but starting with the second one, they were designed to be supercomputers. So we had the torus network, as in Bill's book with Brian. And so we didn't have any painful steps along the way of adding features and having other features kind of conflict with those features and stuff. So we were able to start out with a clean sheet of paper with a supercomputer design.
Yeah, I think that was a prescient. The fact that your second design in 2017, you realized that you needed a supercomputer for training, and that's what you were going to build right from the start.
Yeah,
and it was liquid cooled in 2018 or so.
Yeah. So we've been liquid cooled for 8 years.
Yeah. So and that's what a lot of these look like. Okay. And by the way, I would like to thank the people at Hot Chips, which happened right here in Silicon Valley a couple days ago. I went around and asked for questions to give Bill, and so I got some really goodness. Okay, Nvidia and Google are both world-class system companies. Has the engineering of systems, the interconnect, the memory, power, cooling, and packaging become an even bigger moat for competitors than the silicon itself? And how do your approaches to interconnectivity address the critical bottlenecks in scaling? Where are they similar and different? I think, Bill, it's your turn to go first.
Okay. So I think the product is the whole system. And that's not just the GPU or even the board with GPUs and CPUs and networking gear. It's all the hardware, all the software, and the configuration that makes it all work well together. Starting, I think, in our Pascal generation, I think it was about 2015, we started offering something we called a DGX SuperPod, which was if you bought this is even before we had all the captive large-scale networking. We had our own internal, NVLink networking, but we hadn't yet acquired Mellanox. But we'd you'll use this switch, you'll configure it like this, and you'll do that. And if you did that, you could put together, a collection of, in that period of time, maybe 10,000 GPUs, and you would turn it on and it would work. And in contrast, when we would build the big DOE supercomputers, like when we did, Titan in what was that, 2011 or 2012, and Summit and Sierra, you would typically go through a 6-month period after you had all the hardware working, bringing it up because of little things in network configuration of the different things. So you're delivering the entire product, you're delivering a system that has to work reliably over long training jobs with very high availability. And so, I think there's a lot of systems expertise that goes into delivering that and having a standardized configuration for us, because we're selling into a lot of different data centers where people did things different ways, was critical to get the system up and running quickly and run it extremely reliably. Now, where are things different? I think our scale-up network is probably the place that our systems are the most different, where Google uses the 3D torus with the optical circuit switches to configure on bad things. We take a much more conventional networking approach where we basically build our scale-up network with a clone network, but with a proprietary very low latency link to get around a lot of the overhead of conventional Ethernet, and then have a scale-out network that is conventional Ethernet.
Yeah, and just following up on one of your points, I think a lot of the startups don't have that system experience. You know, Louise and others wrote, you know, the data center is a computer, and, you know, like learning about systems the hard way by building those supercomputers. I think a lot of those lessons aren't obvious until you've experienced the pain yourself, and I think that gives both of us an advantage over startups.
Yeah, he was talking about Luis Barroso and Urs Hosel and Partha's book, The Warehouse is the Computer, or something like that. But anyways, it's in several editions, and all the
Warehouse computing,
all the lessons have been learned over the years about building at this giant scale.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the answer to the question was kind of, yeah, it kind of is a moat. If you don't, the chips, there's a lot more to it than chips. So how much of NVIDIA's and Google's competitive advantage today is really about the hardware versus basically software, the compiler libraries? And how does that work within your organizations? And putting it differently, if you gave the startup the net list and maybe the layout, but not the stack, could they compete? And Norm, tag you.
In the design of TPUs, we tried to follow the advice of my thesis advisor.
Well, that's a wonderful idea. I think that should be a requirement. But what was his advice?
Don't put off until runtime what you can do at compile time.
Okay.
We tried to do that, and we designed the architecture, you know, in a room of 10 people, and 2 of them were part of the compiler team. So we tried to make a machine that was easy to compile to, and so I think that provided a lot of benefits. And also, we've kept the same general architecture, and, you know, for example, the sizes of the memories can increase or decrease, and things like that. But, you know, that's like having a PC. You can put more DIMMs in your PC and still run, you know, Word. So it's pretty flexible.
What about the libraries?
Yeah, there's a lot of frameworks, and they're evolving. So it's important to keep up with those and to have good support. And then also, some people like writing their own kernels, and so you need to support those as well.
How about you, Bill, about hardware and software?
Yeah, so, you know, the product is the whole system, which includes, you know, the hardware and the software. And the software is a really integral part of it. But in many ways, for deep learning, it's an easier problem than the problem we had with general GPU computing that sort of led up to that. You know, when we sort of kicked off GPU computing with CUDA and G80 being launched in 2006, there were literally thousands of applications that would benefit from running in parallel, but had serial codes, many of them written in Fortran, and it was a huge burden. And there were 100,000 mainline codes to port that stuff over. And so we made a huge investment in the CUDA ecosystem, the CUDA language itself, and many libraries underneath to do FFTs well, to do matrix operations well, and all of this. And so when we started our first effort in deep learning in 2010, developing the software in a collaborative project with Andrew Ng at Stanford that turned into cuDNN, it was wow, this is a really tiny application. There's only a couple kernels that are really important in here. We make those run fast, this whole thing runs fast. That was such a breath of fresh air after looking at a weather code with a million lines of code that it's an easy problem compared to what the problem with supercomputing and trying to parallelize those old dusty decks was. That became easy. We also became very critical. We could see that we'd get a program, we'd get one of these deep learning models up and running, and then over the next 6 months, we'd double its performance because there are easy ways to lose performance in there. And so we started developing tools that would profile and tools that would help us fuse kernels and tune things to make it work well. So I think the software is a very, very critical part. I don't know how much of a barrier that's going to be to these startups these days, because right now you just sort of tell Claude, I want a software stack, and go away for a week. And
That's my next question,
Okay.
as you know. Anybody who's knows a programmer has heard from their spouse of shouts in the middle of the night. Oh my God, look what it did. But yeah, we're seeing this a remarkable event about coding being done by machines rather than by people. So yeah, that was kind of the question. Do you think if there was a moat software, is that about to go away with the advances in AI, or that's a Pollyannish view of what's going on here?
I think any software moat, I think there's still an advantage to having libraries that have been tuned and honed over the years that are easy for people to apply. But I think that moat has been significantly degraded, because if you have the spec of that library, I think turning Claude Code loose and recreating it is not that difficult a thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. The moat is getting shallower.
It's getting filled up with sand. It's starting to be able to walk across.
Yeah.
Okay, Bill brought this up, but and when Bill gives a talk, he gives credit to this. We squeezed a lot of speed of the first few years by reducing precision. Like for me, I figured out our exponent is bigger than the fraction, right? That's a new thing, relatively new idea. But we can only go so low. What happens for generation over generation improvements when we can't shave bits off anymore? I can't remember.
Okay.
Bill, you're up.
Yeah, so we've pretty much hit 2x per year over the past 14 years, starting with Kepler in 2012, which is the first generation since we've really looked at this as a serious application. And only 3x of that has come from process technology. This is in contrast to the microprocessor heydays of the 90s, when it all came from process technology. And I think at Nvidia we've kind of led the way with numerics, going from starting out with FP32, because that's what we had in Kepler, and shipping NVFP4, and there's some new things in Vera Rubin. Clearly there's a couple more turns there, but we're getting near the end on numerical precision. But there's still a couple clever things that can be done. But there are a lot of other axes that we can continue to innovate along: sparsity, circuits, locality, even better models that wind up giving you sort of more tokens per watt. But we are sort of getting down to the point where all the low-hanging fruit has been picked, and we need to climb higher up the tree to find those 2x fruits hanging from the branches. But we have a bunch of good ideas. I think it's going to get us through at least the next 4 or 5 generations, and then I can retire.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't want to suggest
Is that 4 or 5 years, or 8 to 10 years?
Yeah, I didn't want to suggest numerics was the only thing, but that was one of the. That was certainly a low-hanging fruit, right? As we look
that
back.
was very low-hanging. Yeah.
And we also had some numeric innovation. So when Jeff was doing those initial AI things.
This is Jeff Dean.
Jeff Dean. They were doing it in FP32, but then storing it by truncating the low-order 16 bits. And if you hear truncation and you're a numerical analyst, it's kind of like fingernails on a chalkboard. But it actually worked. So when we developed TPUs, we could run programs in BF16 that had run on CPUs, which were being used at the time.
BF16 is the whacked, the chopped IEEE 32-bit one where you...
Right. Yeah. So we could run those and get the same results. And so that was really powerful because we didn't have to spend a lot of time debugging things, at the system level. Why is this model not working? Things like that. So we could verify correct operation. And then once we had that, we used that for a while before we started adopting the smaller formats like FP8 and FP4.
So I think one of Google's advantages, theoretical advantages at least, is Google both have people pushing the state of the AI and building hardware. And so theoretically, that's a big advantage. And then I think I read that Nvidia is going to build up in-house expertise. So what do you think, how big of an advantage is the access to people pushing to the state of the art versus people who are just going to use open models and do that, or not have that close relationship for ML? I think, Norm, I think you're up.
Yeah, there's leaderboards that show some of the open models are performing quite well, and so there's a race for the proprietary models to stay ahead. I think they'll due to the ability to do better tuning of the models for a particular system, either a GPU or a TPU. There'll always be some advantage to the proprietary versions, but
I was thinking more of, as hardware people could go talk to the ML people about what's happening next and what should we put in our hardware, that if you didn't have access to those experts, you would have to guess. You see that?
To some extent. The problem is it takes 2.5 or 3 years from an initial idea to have a system that can be manufactured in volume. And the ML people come up with a new idea like every 3 months or 6 months.
Okay.
So,
all right.
You can't really design for a super specialized machine for a particular model, because it'll be different. And like Bill said earlier, you just have to do those basic operations, matrix operations, vector operations and stuff, and do them well.
Okay, if it takes so long and they iterate faster, why are you guys getting into building your own models?
We're not getting into it. We've been doing it.
Okay, you've been doing, sorry.
Some time, and we have a lot of internal expertise, but I think there's a distinction here between a company like OpenAI, who just had a great paper at Hot Chips on their jalapeno processor, where they're designing a chip pretty much to run one model, and therefore they know what their relative mix is of matrix ops and vector ops and memory bandwidth and such. If you have to support all the models that are out there, there's a very big variety, and it shifts that provisioning, especially memory bandwidth versus math in different ways, and particularly with the attention. The attention mechanisms are starting to get pretty interesting. This started happening with DeepSeek when they came out with the MLA attention, and now a lot of the different models have different hybrid attention schemes, so they'll alternate layers of 3 layers of state space and 1 layer of full n-squared attention. A lot of people are doing sparse attention, where they'll do a quick filter and then have to pick out the top K things to attend to. And this variation in attention, I think, drives a lot of different demands on the hardware. And so if you're in the position of being, we're going to be a silicon supplier, we're going to support all the models, it requires you to sort of look across all those models and say, what is the right hardware to build to make everybody as happy as you can without making anybody really unhappy? and that's a hard thing to do. You have to decide which ones you're going to emphasize, which ones you're not. And as Norm pointed out, you've got to aim ahead of the duck, because it's going to be a couple years before this is out. And in the meantime, a lot of clever ideas people are going to come up with in the models that we haven't seen yet. And so this is, I think, what good computer architecture is about, is figuring out how to make the most people happy and anticipate what the applications are going to need and deliver a product that serves that.
Yeah. And talking about models, I think one of the more disruptive things that's been recently developed is, well, it was proposed like 7 years ago, but mixtures of experts, because it requires a lot more interconnect bandwidth. And if you want to have quick responses for users, you really have to push down on the latency. So training is somewhat easier in that it's more of a bandwidth thing. Latency is harder to get in computer systems than low latency than higher bandwidth. Yeah.
All right, so that's what drove the board fly configuration.
Exactly.
Your latest TPU. Yeah.
Yeah, given we're at the Computer History Museum, I was struck at the Hot Chips conference. It felt like a recreation of the battles from the 1980s. So in the 1980s, when RISC processors were getting popular, people were using MIPS, millions of instructions per second, as the metric. And, but that was up to you how to define it, what you ran, and all that stuff. So the RISC companies were saying, well, you know, you can trust us, our number, but all those other bastards are lying. Right? So at Hot Chips, they were using tokens per second as the metric. Oh. And what were they running? How big was the model? No, it was just tokens per second. So there was an attempt to try and the solution for the RISC one led to the companies getting together, collaborating on benchmarks, which were called SPEC, which were pretty, you know, there's pluses and minuses SPEC, but they rallied around it, and then it turned out even if you were 10% slower, you could have other advantages. And so it worked out pretty well. So there was an attempt called MLPerf to anticipate this problem that's been around for many years. But I mean, and SPEC, MLPerf was not quoted was not mentioned, I think, at the Hot Chips. So do you agree that maybe MLPerf was not as successful at HOPS as SPEC? And if not, why do you think it didn't? And I think it's your turn, okay. Bill.
So I like MLPerf because it sort of, you know, gave a way of, you know, cutting through. It did what benchmarks are supposed to be. It was a very nice level playing field to cut through the BS and say, okay, you know, how well do you really perform on this particular application? But I think it had two issues, which is why you didn't hear much about it at Hot Chips. The first is almost nobody submitted to it. And so
well, that's a problem.
Instead, because it was a lot of work. And we did every time. In fact, we did all the benchmarks every generation. Yeah. And every iteration of MLPerf, what is it on 7.1 or something now or whatever. But a lot of startups would say, oh no, that's inconvenient. And if we actually played by all the rules, we wouldn't look that good. So we're going to cherry pick this one result and put that on our slides and talk about that. And so that's one reason why I think it hasn't really taken off. The other reason is today what everybody is really worried about is tokens per watt or tokens per dollar. And there's really, you know, most of the MLPerf benchmarks don't really address that. And even I think the one that comes close, it doesn't address it in quite the right way. And so what everybody is showing, and actually you did see some slides of this at Hot Chips, is the semi-analysis inference X benchmark, because it hits exactly the data that people want, and they do it in a very reproducible way. To get a data point on that semi-analysis chart, you have to have a, whether it's GitHub or Hugging Face, a repository of the code that you can load and run and show on that hardware with this model. This is the tokens per second, tokens.
Is this something you run yourself, or they do it for you?
They do it, yeah.
And they run it on your hardware and give you a number? Is that how it works?
Okay. I don't remember the details of that, but it's
but that's the one, that seems to be one that's catching on.
I think people are using inference X more than MLPerf today.
Yeah.
Yeah, that MLPerf does require like a full-time team. Mm-hmm. And not a small team either. So, yeah, that's one of the issues with it.
So it ended up just being too intensive to run. Like the old TPC benchmarks were a big effort for these database companies. So expensive, and this alternative was working pretty well.
Yeah, it was both expensive, and it didn't really give you the number you wanted.
It wasn't, okay. Other than that, it was great. All right, I'm supposed to warn the AV people we'll do a poll after this. You'll show the poll results of my question after this question? Okay. And this is more open-ended. The Silicon Gold Rush has significant economic, societal, and even geopolitical implications. Beyond the technology itself, what do you believe are the most profound impacts of this rapid acceleration in AI hardware development, and what responsibility do hardware architects like us and leaders of these companies bear in shaping that future responsibly? Bill, I think it's your turn.
Okay. So I wouldn't call it the Silicon Gold Rush. I'd call it the AI Gold Rush, because it's really a rush in AI. And I think it's really benefiting almost all aspects of our lives. So if you look at medicine, I think this is where one of its early applications was in image analysis. but now it's also being applied to diagnosis, where it's helping doctors give more accurate diagnoses, and we can have personal health coaches that sort of look at us and say, I don't think you should eat that piece of cake over your calorie intake today.
That takes AI.
What if you just ignored that coach?
Yeah, well, that's up to you, but at least he gave you the advice. In education, I'm a recovering educator. Every student could have a personalized tutor that really understands what motivates them, how they learn, and presents the material in a way that gets them through the difficulties of grasping complex concepts. In engineering, AI is already automating a lot of our tasks. I recently needed to design a piece of hardware. I basically wrote the spec and set Claude loose, and after fixing a couple errors in my spec, it came out with a pretty good design.
Did it fix the
No,
bugs?
it produced exactly what I asked for, which was not the right thing. So you have to learn how to write a good spec. But it's basically enabling engineers in all sorts of fields to move up the ladder, right? They're no longer doing the junior level calculations and stuff. They're deciding what needs to get built, and they're managing a team of agent minions that actually carry out the work. And a lot of business processes are moving in the same way. So we're all becoming much more productive. So I think in entertainment, it's helping us produce really wonderful compositions, whether it's in movies or games or music. And so I think there's a tremendous number of benefits about AI. But on the flip side, any great technology can be used for good and can be used for evil. And so the most obvious ones with AI are deep fakes. And I think we need to move very rapidly to embrace provenance and authentication, so that basically, unless you see an image as being authenticated appropriately, you just assume that it's a fake. I think that there's danger with various nefarious uses. Cyber has gotten a lot of attention lately, although even though people like to talk about the AI side of cyber, the vast majority, I think it's like over 80% of all successful cyber attacks are human engineering. They're phishing attacks.
Yeah.
Of course, AI makes that better. You can use AI for pathogen design. And then there's the big risk is, as we make everybody more productive, the nature of employment is going to change, and we'll need more people in certain jobs and fewer people in other jobs. We need to find some way of easing that transition for the people who are dropping out of one and moving into the other.
Yeah, how do we reskill people whose jobs change? Norm, you got a take on this?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest impacts is going to be in science. They've made a lot of super impressive results, which don't usually make the popular press. So at Google DeepMind, they folded all the proteins known to mankind.
And got a Nobel Prize.
Yeah, got a Nobel Prize. Okay, yeah. And there's many other examples in science. So another thing is Google is using it in virtually all of their applications. But it's very subtle, and in many places you don't really notice it. So, for example, one of the first applications was Google Maps. That was when Louise was running Maps. And, the original Google Maps would say, drive, 1,000 feet and turn right on Tennyson Street, right? And by integrating the Street View database, now it says things like, drive 1,000 feet and turn right at the Shell gas station. That's much more accessible to people, and especially at night when the street signs aren't lit. Sunnyvale has nice lit up ones, but Palo Alto we don't. So, there's a lot of subtle things like that, which I think people won't notice, but we'll just take for granted after a while.
Okay, let's see. Can you show the poll? Does that work? Okay, so here's my question. The biggest bottleneck to continued widespread deployment of AI chips is energy availability, semiconductor manufacturing capacity, cooling of hot chips, memory capacity, bandwidth, cost of AI chips. Don't know. Whoop. More people don't know. Oh, okay. Well, I guess. Oh, this is great.
Dynamic. Yeah.
Well,
Dynamic,
we won't. It's still changing, but clearly, right now it's energy availability. Well, maybe I should just. Maybe I'll give it 30 seconds. So well, you guys could answer this question yourselves, and you could disagree with the audience. What do you think about what's this biggest limiter of those things?
Well, I was just going to talk about the energy availability.
Okay, go ahead.
So one of the issues is, people are talking about gigawatt data centers or 5 gigawatt data centers, and the transmission lines are very hard to get permits for, and communities don't like to have big power lines running over their houses and stuff. And so a lot of the hyperscalers and other companies are moving to a model where they're doing on-site power generation. And you can do that in various ways. Some companies use natural gas to generate electricity, but if you put it in the right place, you can get most of the power from wind and solar. And so that's the approach that we're trying to take.
Which is carbon-free energy, and will not add to the load on the climate.
Right.
But by going off the grid and using carbon-free energy sources, you can build data centers without clobbering things.
Yeah, you have an issue that you need steady power for your data center, and the sun is only out during the day and when there are no clouds, and the wind only works when the wind's blowing. But in general, we've seen the various sources of supply being reasonably well balanced. I think it's just the natural market forces that are deploying resources to do that. But land, power, shell, which is sort of the three things that you need, to build a data center, tends to drive that demand. And while a lot of people are looking at natural gas and co-locating generators, I think gas turbines are sold out for like the next 5 years because of this demand. And there are companies that are taking engines off of airplanes and converting them to be used as generators for stranding lots of passengers somewhere.
But if that's what we do, if we go to natural gas, we're going to have a giant carbon footprint. If we don't,
but it's often used to back some more renewable source. They'll have solar and wind, but because you can't count on that, and we don't have the storage capacity at this point, although there's some very, very good technologies that are.
So you think like lithium batteries aren't going to be a?
I think lithium batteries are too expensive per kilowatt hour to ride through the kind of 20 to 100 hour thing you really need to bridge a gap when you might not have sunny days for a period of time. There are thermal batteries that are looking very promising, and there are people starting to build data centers with those that are cheap enough per kilowatt hour that they could fill that gap.
So if you're doing serving to consumers, though, most consumers, there's a diurnal cycle, right? And so you don't have to have full power at 3 a.m. when you're serving. So.
It has to do with keeping use of a capital resource, right? You've spent, $10 billion building a data center, and you'd like to have that capital resource be busy around the clock. And so if the consumers here are all sleeping, you'll sell those GPU cycles to the consumers on the other side of the world where it's daylight.
The latency is too large.
It depends on the use.
we like quick responses for our users.
What about nuclear is also carbon-free, and there's these small modular reactors. I think Google's certainly made an announcement in this space. Do you guys have thoughts about nuclear as to help data centers?
We're looking at all technologies. We actually have a guy whose job it is to sort of keep track of energy technologies and advise on data centers. And it looks promising, but it's always been expensive compared to if you look at what they call the levelized cost per kilowatt hour, compared to natural gas. Natural gas is very tough to beat, and even if you're worried about the carbon, natural gas with carbon sequestration, I think still winds up beating nuclear on levelized cost per kilowatt hour.
I'm a big fan of pumped hydro, but in Illinois, where I'm from, it's not
pretty
too
flat.
practical.
Okay, now I'm going to go to audience questions, just about when I said I would, too. What are the biggest challenge, and the way the audience questions get voted up and down, so this is the most popular one. What are the biggest challenges to resolving the known supply chain barriers associated with AI hardware? Which I presume is the over demand compared to the supply. So do you have a take on that? The biggest, or what's the biggest challenge, I guess, what's the biggest challenges?
I mean, the biggest challenge is it takes a long time to build a fab.
Yeah.
And I think right now the place that's being felt the most painful is on the memory side. And the memory manufacturers are loving it because they can charge many times more for the same part if they'd had them in plentiful supply. So maybe they're less motivated to build the fabs than they otherwise would be.
Yeah.
I think it's always this thing where you're trying to project demand, and when that demand exceeds what you projected, you've got this 2 or 3 year delay to actually build the production capacity.
If I had been paying more attention, I probably could have figured this out before it happened to some degree, because memory densities, DRAM scaling has stopped, basically. And so since computers keep needing more and more memory, even ignoring the need for memory in AI, I think it's finally tipped the balance where for quite a while it'll be a better business. It used to be one of the worst businesses, DRAM manufacturing.
So yeah, basically you've taught me that SRAM has already plateaued.
Yeah.
And but DRAM is basically plateaued, but the demand hasn't plateaued.
Right.
And so it's going to be a long time. Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting for the memory companies because their history is overbuild fabs, and then the prices go down. They've got a couple of decades of that, and so are they just going to say we're highly profitable? What's wrong with the way things are today? And just
unfortunately, competition hopefully will fix that, and we're highly profitable. We'd like a little bit more share, and so they'll build their fab on, and the other guys will too, and hopefully it will.
Yeah,
less.
but fabs are expensive,
Yeah.
and as you pointed out, take a long time, not only to build, but to get the yield up and all the other things.
I'm looking forward to what you guys are going to say publicly about this next question. How significant will the impact of quantum computing be on the topics discussed this evening when the technology matures?
I would say very, very little. So I think quantum computing
I'm so glad you're here.
is a great technology.
Bill Dally said that, not Dave Patterson. Okay.
You'll get beat up by Jensen tomorrow.
Yeah, so very little. Go.
But the reason is there are sort of two really good quantum algorithms, right? One is to use quantum computing to simulate quantum chemistry. And the other is Shor's algorithm, which is to use quantum computing to basically factor the product of two large prime numbers and break a lot of modern cryptography. There's a third algorithm, Grover's algorithm, but for optimization, but it only gives you quadratic speedup, not exponential speedup. But all of these algorithms have the property that they take advantage of the fact that quantum computers are large computation, small data machines. In people's wildest dreams, they'd like to get a few thousand error-corrected qubits. And then you get, from the exponential speedup of superposition, you get to do tremendous amounts of calculations on a few thousand bits. AI is the other way around. It's a large data, relatively small computation problem. So quantum computing is not going to have a measurable impact on either training or inference for AI.
I know who I'm going to call on the questions in the future. Yeah, I mean, the AI revolution, we were 70 years into AI, right? And there was a lot of ideas that didn't work, right? It's been learned from data, the big data machine learning thing that's the breakthrough, and that's not like you said. So
Yeah, the area where it will have an effect is not on computation, I don't think, but communication. So the last Turing Award, or maybe the one before it, I guess,
you mean Nobel? Turing Award for quantum? Oh yeah, quantum. Yeah, for Turing Award, you're right.
Yeah, quantum transmission and cryptography.
But I thought quantum transmission was very low latency, but not much data. Is that right? Okay, that we're out of our. We're not.
I mean, if you're sending 300 bit long key, you don't need high bandwidth.
Yeah.
And then you can send all the rest of it encoded, and then it doesn't matter.
Your keys need to be longer than 300 bits.
This may be outside of our expertise, but that's the next question. What are the national security implications associated with AI hardware maturation? I guess if you've worked in stuff like that, Bill, do you have any?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, I think I don't know that one either. This is a specific company. I don't know if you're gonna, what is your take on etched architecture, essentially etching an LLM on the chip, or so like Talus or something like that?
Yeah, well, Talus would be the extreme, where they're planning to use ROM.
These architectures are less programmable, and they're kind of building the model into the hardware, right?
Well, yeah, my understanding is that that's, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, but Etch, the company, started out with that thesis, and then it became more and more programmable, and now it's...
Is it they try to make a product?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I thought I read something in the popular press that Google was building some chip that had...
Would you like to reveal any secrets?
There's research into everything.
Oh, that's a great answer.
Yeah.
That's a,
but I think it's interesting because if you take the Talus approach, if you say, they're going to the extreme, not even that we're going to take a particular model and totally optimized for that, but we're going to take the set of weights and burn them into ROM, because that will wind up being maybe 4 times as dense as SRAM, and way less dense than DRAM, by the way. You've got to have figured that there is some model that is not changing very fast, because right now the frontier models are coming out with a new release every month or so. Even if you look at the various open source models, there's a clever new idea every couple weeks that would completely break even trying to make it too closely matched to the model, even if you made the weights programmable.
Yeah,
I think we're in the early days still, and programmability is critically important.
yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of what you said. This is a completely different universe from CPUs with million-line legacy code and millions of programmers. It's really small amount of code, and not as many there, and the tremendous pressure to innovate. And so that's allowing this, that makes it easier not only for the hardware people, it makes it easier for the software people or the algorithm people to innovate and deploy it. So it's a remarkable rate of change, and this idea that you could pick a model and get a chip out in time, and how long is that lifetime and stuff. It's an interesting bet, but it'll be interesting to watch how it works. Okay, what is the right balance between centralized and distributed compute? What are the implications for edge compute hardware? Well, maybe we could just change that. What do you get? We all think about the data center.
Well, we ship an awful lot of products that go into autonomous vehicles. Every Mercedes above a certain level has an Nvidia processor and Nvidia software in it for its self-driving features. And that's the example of, if you can put it in the data center, you do, because it's much more economical to deliver compute in a data center, but for reasons of latency, or you have to be able to operate reliably with a network partition, you may need to compute on the edge, or in some cases you're acquiring lots and lots of data, you can't afford to send it all the way back to the data center, you have to do some reduction on the edge. But I think the general rule is, if you can afford to do it in the data center, if one of those other factors doesn't limit you, you do it there. But if you have to do it on the edge, you do, and it drives a different set of requirements.
Yeah, and the Google Pixel phones have an edge TPU, so it handles a lot of stuff that's relatively simple, like speech recognition is pretty simple these days compared to these other big models. And so, but if there's something that's too big for it, then it needs to go over the network if it's available.
Do you talk to the people who do the computers for Waymo? Are you familiar with that at all? Is that another part of the company?
They set up Google to be part of Alphabet, and then Waymo is W, and so we don't, talk that much.
Okay. since floating point precision achieves comparable AI results, will there ever be room for analog rather than digital systems?
Yeah,
You guys must hear this all the time. What about analog for, you can do multiply so coolly in analog. Isn't that the future?
yeah, so one of the things that when you actually build real systems for a living, you have to do is test them to see whether they're right or not. And if you have something that's analog or doesn't get the same result each time, it makes it really hard to test the device to see whether it's working correctly or not. I mean, if you're probing wafers, you have to send test sequences, and then you read back bits at tremendous speed, and they have to match one for one. So analog, even if it can be more effective in some circumstances, you have this problem that you might not always get the same answer.
And so how do you know if the chip works or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, but even if you could test it, I've seen few cases where analog actually has an advantage. We continuously reevaluate this because it's a very seductive argument that you want to do a matrix multiply, well just put the activations in as current, and then you have a resistor, and if you get that as a conductance, V is I times G, and you've gotten your matrix multiply for free. And by the way, you can then sum a lot of those together also for free. And you wind up getting sort of free computation. Well, it's not free. There's no such thing as a free lunch or a free multiply. It costs something, but what's even worse is in analog, you don't really have a reliable way of storing a value. To store it for for a very short instant of time, you can put the value on a capacitor. But it's going to leak off, especially in modern semiconductor technologies. And if you need to move it any distance, it's very expensive to try to move it in analog. So typically what people do is they'll build a little array to do in-memory compute analog, do a matrix multiply of some activations times weights, and then you sum the results and get the value out, and then you have to do an A to D conversion. And if you look at the fundamental requirements of energy to do that A to D conversion, it winds up limiting you to something, if you wanted to be at, say, 8-bit precision, to something on the order of 5 teraops per watt. Whereas with conventional digital technology, we build accelerators that are 100 teraops per watt. So you're down by more than an order of magnitude.
So when you include the conversion, if you can do it without converting,
if you could stay analog, you could potentially make an attractive device. But if you have to convert, you're going to lose.
Yeah, and I haven't been downstairs to the museum part lately, but it starts out with some analog computers, and there's a reason why they stopped being used around World War II. So
this one, in addition to the excitement around software tools and talking to my younger colleagues, a lot of excitement about using AI for hardware design. And so this question is, what will the next chip design software look like? Will they be radically different from what we have used for the last 30 years? This seems like both of you must have an opinion on this.
Yeah, so I think the chip design software is going to be an LLM that you talk to. And
okay, you're very quotable.
I want this chip.
So we should sell my ECAD stock tomorrow.
I think they have a lot of expertise and a lot of the pieces that are needed to plug that together.
Okay, so you need to capture that knowledge in your LLM.
Yeah, and the LLM needs to know how to run the tools, right? If you're going to need to run those tools to do the place and route and the verification. But I think to me, I look at where we wind up spending a lot of the human time in designing a chip, and it's in verification.
Yes.
And LLMs are really good at writing tests, right? You can say, make sure this works, cover all the edge cases, and it will write a whole test suite for you. And that's where 75% of our labor goes.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's that, the results we presented at Hot Chips showed, like 10% improvements in doing the design and stuff. But design verification, it's the biggest part of the team is the DV team. And that they need all the help they can.
Yeah, and we're seeing bigger than 10%. We're seeing, for average engineers, a doubling of productivity, and for really good engineers, 10x.
Well, what I was talking about was
Layout.
Circuit, basically performance.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But-
oh, you're talking about performance, not human productivity. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but you're talking about for all tasks or for verification?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the benchmark study that was for. It was for a particular task. The average came out to be about 3x. I mean, it made engineers just way more productive. And so I think that's going to be the design tools of the future. And there are a whole bunch of startups now. And again, this is the thing in AI. The real gold miners are the people attacking a vertical. There are a whole bunch of startups attacking the EDA vertical.
Let me do one more. Yeah, I'm sure. What do you think about CPU, GPU ecosystem to make space for compute in memory or memory-bound workloads? Well, what do you think about, how about making the CPU closer to the GPU? You must have a comment on that.
Well, ours are pretty close, right? So they sit on what we call our chip-to-chip NVLink. It's actually technology internally we call GRS because it's ground referenced. Simply, it's a single-ended, very high-speed link, and so you have to ask, what do you get by making them close? And we get a couple things. One is we want to provision that link between the GPU and the CPU so that all of the, and I forget what it is, 1.8 terabyte per second of LPDDR5 bandwidth that's attached to the Vera CPU, and I don't memorize these numbers, so that may be off, but all of that CPU memory bandwidth can be routed to either of the two GPUs that's attached to it. So the link is provisioned, so that link is never a bottleneck. And then the question is, what do you need in terms of latency? And because fetching from that memory isn't necessarily a relatively high latency operation, the little bit that you add with the link winds up not being that material, and it's only a single link. You're not going through a switch or anything like that. And then there's control interactions, but if you think about it's basically when you launch a kernel that you need to do that, and that's, there's enough latency with the other parts of that making that link faster isn't that critical. It turns out we have many tens of little RISC-V CPUs on our GPU, but they're all there for little housekeeping operations that the user never sees. For the CPUs that the user programs, the NVLink chip-to-chip is actually just about as close as you want it, and is kind of the right balance.
How about for TPUs?
Yeah, so I think long-term, the CPU that's associated with the accelerator is going to be doing mainly housekeeping, like babysitting kind of chores. I think that the real interesting thing that's happening now is agentic computing. So if you say, write me a program, it's got to compile it somewhere, and you're not going to compile it on a matrix multiplier systolic array, right? So you've got to have real CPUs with, serious memory systems and stuff, and serious networking in the same data center. And so,
Right, but in the data center, it doesn't have to be that close because you're firing off a compile job.
Right, but I think that's where the CPUs really will come in, is doing things like compiling.
Yeah,
Doing the tool calls.
Yeah.
It doesn't, but if you're going to do compiling casts, I don't quite see why it has to be close to do that, because that's a pretty...
No, it doesn't have to be close. It's just in the same data center.
What I was going to do a closing question, but we have a suggestion as well, basically about advice to younger people. I was thinking like high school students, college students. One of the questions we have here, let's see if I can find it. I'm 10 years old. What advice do you have to me to prepare for my future? I think your kids are, all of our kids, I don't think any of us have, well, I have grandkids that old. What would you say to 10-year-olds? Do you have any advice to 10-year-olds? Then I'll ask you about older students.
So, study math and science. I think that you need a good foundation, and there's no substitute for having a really strong, background in mathematics and basic sciences.
How about you, Norm?
I I think another important thing is communication skills are really important. So learning how to write well, I know LLMs can do it for you, but I think there's going to be cases where you don't have one handy and you still need to communicate well.
Yeah, you think clearly do that. So yeah, my last question is going to be, given the incredible pace of innovation we're witnessing, what advice would each of you offer to young computer architects and engineers entering the field today looking to make their mark in the computer architecture space? You guys have certainly made great marks in your careers. If you look back, what let you make those marks, and what you think you should offer, what advice would you give for this current generation?
Well, I think the world's very different today. I mean, I had great fun early in my career. I designed a machine at Bell Labs, drawing all the circuits with pencil on vellum, and having a technician who did the layout for them. And it actually all worked on first silicon without ever doing a simulation. But
Wow.
having great manual logic design skills, I think it no longer has any value at all.
I know a lot about punch cards.
Yeah. But I think I would have three pieces of advice for an aspiring computer architect. The first is to master vertical. The second is to be very broad in your understanding of computer technology. And then the third is to make AI your partner. And I think the reason for the first is I think a lot of the value today is in understanding what to design, not in having great manual logic design skills to realize it, because the tools will help, the AI will help you realize it, making AI your partner. But then I see many computer architects who limit themselves because they'll ask the memory guy, oh, can we build a memory like this? And the guy will say, no, you can't do that. But if you have a really broad understanding of circuit design, you realize he's not thinking enough out of the box. And you can build a memory that does that. This machine at Bell Labs, by the way, had a 3T DRAM on it.
Wow.
All the circuit guys told me, oh, that's not going to work. And I went and I prototyped it up and convinced myself that it would work. We actually did a test chip before we did the final chip to make sure it would. But you have to be broad enough in your understanding that you can do circuit design when needed and things like that to sort of get outside the box and get outside the limits of the conventional thinking of what the toolbox you have available to you. And then I think people really need to figure out what is a uniquely human part of the human AI partnership in doing computer architecture, and practice at being good at what the human can do, because there's no point in doing what the AI can do, because it's just going to do it better.
But you have to be able to, so far you have to be able to recognize when it's screwed up, right?
Oh, yeah.
So do you have to know how to do it manually to be able to recognize when it's screwed
I can
up?
definitely recognize when it's screwing up, but maybe that's because I can do it manually.
Yeah, well, yeah.
The other thing you can do is you can get one AI to check the other one.
Okay. How about you, Norm? Advice to the next generation?
Yeah. For computer architects, it's got a long history, and going back 70 years or more. And there are a lot of lessons learned along the way. And I think, one of the best things to do is just learn about all those historical lessons, because some of them apply today, some don't apply today. And there's no point like reinventing something that didn't work the last 7 or 8 times people tried it.
Okay, with that, I think we invite Mark back up on the stage.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave, Norm, and Bill. What a great conversation. Let's give them one more round of applause. And when you think about it, we are called the Computer History Museum, but our conversations really are about the past, present, and future. And so that's really what the museum is about. We would love to get your feedback on tonight's program, so you can scan that QR code. Please tell us. It helps us plan other events. The other thing you can use for a QR code is help us out here. We are reliant on your donations as a museum. A lot of people think that it is Google and Nvidia that is the big companies that support us. It's actually all of you. So thank you guys who are supporters. If you're not a member, we encourage you to join. We'd really appreciate all the help that you can give us. That funding will help us put on our next event, which is Boris Cherney from Claude Code. So it's the flip side of what you guys are talking about. So if you enjoyed tonight, I think you're really going to enjoy hearing Boris speak about Claude Code. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, Mark and Mary Stevens, for your support tonight. And have a safe travel home. And thank these guys one more time.
And we don't forget your
Mark.